the committee will reconvene, and I thank the witness for their patience. I'm going to go ahead and recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Heiss, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for joining us today. I have a few questions. I know you've already commented somewhat on this, but relating to the Waters of the U.S. rule, I'm just curious. My understanding is that the United Agenda, this was supposed to be out by April of 2014. Is that correct? We've heard that.
So I don't recall what the exact agenda dates were for the Waters of the U.S. rule, sir.
Okay, well, it's my understanding, and what we've been told is that was supposed to have been come out last year, and of course it didn't. So that raises a lot of questions as to where all of this stands. And of course, the public comment period of time is over. So can you assure us that there will be a full review and that the issues that are of interest, the comments to the public, will be addressed in their entirety?
Yes, Mr. Heiss, I can give you that assurance. The rule is with the Environmental Protection Agency for development right now into a final regulation. That rule will come to my office for review, and the rule will receive a full review under the executive orders.
It will have a full review?
Yes.
And you can assure us that the comments will be addressed?
One of the things that OIRA does when it's reviewing a final regulation that has been out for notice and comment is to look at how the agency has taken into account the public comment, and we will do that on the Waters rule as we do with every rule.
Okay, thank you. The President evidently has come out stating that as far as having a review of the guidance documents, he was in favor of that, and the Center for Progressive Reform, on the other hand, opposes the review from the guidance documents. I'm curious to know from you if you think the review of the guidance document is a worthwhile endeavor.
So we at OIRA are interested in reviewing anything that an agency does that has regulatory effect, and whether they call that vehicle a regulation, a guidance, a notice, if it creates new regulatory burden and effect on businesses or farmers or any stakeholders, we want to review it. So we at OIRA do review guidance documents, sometimes at the request of agencies just because they want to have interagency review of the guidance document. Other times because they submit it to us and we find that there is some regulatory impact that warrants our analysis and review. So I side with looking at guidance documents where they do create such obligations on stakeholders and the public. Okay,
so you would conclude then that it is a valuable use of your time in OIRA to review the guidance documents?
We don't review all guidance documents. There are many, many guidance documents that many different parts of government issue. Typically, when agencies are issuing a guidance document that's going to have an effect on industry or folks out there in the public, they will submit it to us and we will review it.
What is the guideline that you determine whether or not you look at guidance documents or not? Is it the requests of various committees or what have you, or how do you make that determination?
Usually it's the agency that will request us, that will ask us to look at a guidance document. Other times we will know that an agency is planning to issue a guidance, and we'll say, that relates to a regulation that we reviewed. We'd like to have a look at it.
So there's no official policy determining whether or not you will look at guidance documents?
We have a significant standard for guidances, just as we do for rules. Every little administrative guidance document we may not even be aware of, but we certainly wouldn't have the time or resources, or frankly would not be worth the time or resources to review. But if we know of a significant document and it's one that the agency wants us to review, we will typically review it.
Is there a possibility that some potentially significant guidance documents are not looked at and slip through the cracks, so to speak?
Well, there are some guidances that it wouldn't be within our purview to review.
Such as?
There are agencies whose guidances we don't review, or guidances that are really for internal functioning of an agency or government entity. we very often don't review those because those aren't having impact on stakeholders in the public.
But the guidances that in effect impact the public in whatever different ways that in essence become laws or regulations, or can you assure us that all of those are looked at?
We certainly try to look at guidances that are in themselves creating new regulatory effect. Many guidances articulate an intent to do future rulemakings, and we might not review them because we know we'll review the rules.
Okay, sir. Thank you. I yield back. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman from Georgia. Let me follow up, Mr. Schlansky. What agencies? You said there are some agencies you don't review their guidance. What are those agencies?
We don't typically review guidance, interpretive guidance documents, for example, of the Internal Revenue Service. We don't review typically guidance documents of independent agencies.
So no independent agencies.
We do not review independent agencies.
All right, so Department of Commerce.
The Department of Commerce is an executive branch agency.
So do you review any rulemaking that comes from them?
Yes, we do. We review many rulemakings that come out of the Department of Commerce.
Guidance?
If there is a guidance document that we're aware of that has regulatory effect,
Well, I guess what I'm trying to get at, without me guessing which ones, which agencies do you exclude from reviewing guidance other than the IRS?
independent agencies,
And no others?
no others that
All
I
right,
think of
so,
off the top of my
so
head.
part of your process is really to look at guidance with the EPA, for example.
But the answer is yes, but not every guidance that the EPA might issue.
So internal guidance as you don't, external guidance as you do. So if they're giving a guidance, because what's happening, as you well know, is that there are rules, there are guidances, but depending on who you're talking to, they treat the guidance as a rule. Would you agree with that?
So
In practice?
what we try to do is...
Yes or no? Do you agree with that or not?
I agree that there are sometimes guidances that have...
They get treated as
regulatory effect.
rules.
Yes, and we try to review those.
All right. How do you make sure that you review all of those? If they're being used as a rule, because what I've found is with guidances, the agency many times will use it as a rule if it's to their advantage, and if it's not being implemented, then they say, oh, well, that's just guidance, it's not a rule. How do you deal with that?
Well, we deal with the situation where an agency is issuing a guidance that purports to interpret a rule. And we look to see whether it is extending the rule, whether it was adding burdens that had not been commented on, that were not part of the rulemaking process.
All right. So tell me how you use the unified agenda to promote transparency, or does it?
Well, the objective of the unified agenda and plan, so there are two different documents. The agenda is a broad document that will contain things that are a little more far-reaching into the future. The plan is really the more focused document on what the agency intends to do over the next year. What we try to do is make sure that all rules and significant guidances are listed there so that the public...
So when they will be coming up so the public will know about them.
Exactly.
All right. So it is important that you make that as transparent as possible so that the general public can know about it.
That is why we've worked very hard over the past couple of years to get that on track for its publication, both in the fall and the spring.
Well, it's curious you say that. If you'll go ahead and put up the slide, because if that's truly the agenda, and that's truly your responsibility, let me show you this particular chart. Now, what we've gone back to is the spring of 2012 when it wasn't even issued. The unified agenda wasn't issued. And so you can say, well, that was not really your responsibility at that particular point. But let me tell you, the concern that I have is each time that you publish it, it's the Friday before Christmas, the day before the July 4th, the day before Thanksgiving, the Friday before Memorial Day, and the Friday before Thanksgiving. And if you truly want transparency, why are you rolling this out at a time when people wouldn't really be focusing on it? That's what we call the Friday afternoon data dump, but it's really what you're doing with regards to the unified agenda. Why would you do that?
Well, with all respect, sir, the agenda remains posted.
I understand, but when it comes out, it is newsworthy. And so, well, maybe you can help me a little bit further then, with all due respect. Why do we have question marks under the spring of 2014 and the fall of 2014 in terms of the plans as you talked about? That's under your watch.
So I'm sorry, both of those were issued. I don't understand. The plan and agenda were both issued in the fall and the spring. I don't see what you're referring to.
Okay, from what I understand from counsel, that's a memo that's basically saying on how to respond, not that you put it out.
Oh, the memo to the agencies and the deadline for agency plans, those were issued in each of those times, so I do not have any knowledge of why your slide has questions.
Okay, well, Mr. Shalansky, I guess the concern that I have is we've asked you for those. The committee has, and you haven't responded
I'm sorry, you've asked me for what, sir?
for those documents. And you say you published them, but we've asked for them, and you haven't.
The memo to the agencies for the plan and agenda were duly issued. We received responses, and we posted those plans and agenda. It may be that it happened before holiday weekends, but I would add that, or near holidays, but they were in the fall, they were in the spring, everyone knew they were coming, they were well covered, and they remained posted.
Yeah, I guess my question, and I see the ranking member has come back, so we will go to another line of questioning here. You mentioned earlier with regards to the emails, and when I was asking all of that, you said that we are not entitled to that. How, under what statute, or are you claiming executive privilege on why we would not have those?
Sir, let me clarify. I'm not claiming executive privilege at all. We at OIRA are part of a review process prior to publication of a rule, prior to the point with a proposed rule where it goes out for public comment. We are part of a deliberative process where the integrity of this process, the honest discussion and deliberation between staff in OMB and OIRA, staff in the agencies, has to be able to occur. The purpose, we do post, I mean, just to be clear, everyone can know what the rule looked like when it came into OIRA. That's not hidden from view. Everyone knows what the rule looks like when it goes out. There's docketing on everything that goes back and forth on Clean Air Act rules under the statute. So that's quite clear. And in terms of staff emails and things like that, we don't disclose those because they're part of a deliberative process, and they encourage honesty and integrity in the discussions between staffs of agencies and OIRA.
So what your testimony here today is that in keeping that information from the public encourages honesty and transparency. Is that your testimony today?
It encourages staff to talk honestly with each other, to ask hard questions of each other, to discuss what might be problems or incompleteness in a rule. It's worth making clear again that we at OIRA are just part of the review process.
All right, so let me close with this then. Can you send us a list of either pre-proposed rules or other rules that are undergoing the informal review process? Can you send us a list of those rules?
I don't know what you're referring to when you talk about the
just all of them. Can you send us a list of those that are in the informal rule-making process, or those that are about to be proposed that they're asking you to weigh in on? Because you get comment in that deliberative process.
No, those are rules that are formally under review, sir.
So you're saying, so your testimony here today is that you never engage in dialogue back and forth on an informal rulemaking process?
So we don't have an informal rulemaking process. Agencies make rules.
Do you engage on informal rules making?
So
yes or no?
Again, I don't know what you're referring to when you refer to informal rulemaking.
So there's never an informal process in the deliberative process?
There are times when agencies will come to brief us on a rule that is under development.
That's informal.
So that, the rule is being developed by the agency. I assume as part of a formal rulemaking process. So that's why I'm not quite sure what you mean by informal. They will on occasion come and brief us and say,
okay, what I'm talking about is before the rule is proposed, do they have discussions with you, Mr. Shalansky? That is very clear.
okay. Before,
yes or no?
Sir, before it is submitted to us for review or before the agency publishes it as a
Before they
proposed rule?
publish it as a proposed rule, do they have discussions with you?
Of course they do, because then it is a formal review process. It has been submitted to OIRA
So
for
there's a
review.
formal review before they propose the rule.
Correct. Proposed rules, NPRMs, are reviewed
So
formally
can we get
by
those
OIRA.
documents?
Excuse me?
I said, can we get those
The
documents?
documents you can have are the rule that they submitted to us, and then the rule that they published, so you can see what changed in that process. In terms of emails and interim discussions among staff, we do not disclose those.
Thank you. I'll recognize the gentleman from Pennsylvania for a second round of questions.
Thank you, Chairman Meadows. And again, Administrator Shalansky, thank you for being here. I want to talk about delays, and you've touched on it a little bit, but delays in OIRA's regulatory review process. OIRA has been criticized by members of Congress on both sides of the aisle because certain rules have been under OIRA review for longer than 90 days. The 90-day deadline for OIRA to complete its review of final rules was set by executive order in 1993 and reaffirmed by President Obama in 2011. In June of 2013, several Senate and House members, Democrats, wrote to the then director of OMB, Sylvia Burwell, expressing concern about a number of rules that had been under OIRA review for well beyond that 90-day limit. And Administrator Shalansky, I too am concerned about lengthy delays in OIRA's regulatory review process. You've touched on it a little bit already, but I want you to elaborate on what the factors are that cause OIRA's review process to go beyond the 90-day period. Will you do that?
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Cartwright. So let me begin by just framing the issue. I think that the reduction of extended review periods has been one of the success stories of OIRA over the past couple of years. We have very few rules, and especially compared to what the situation was when the letter was written to then Director Burwell, that are under extended review. And on average, we are meeting our normative times. In fact, we're getting a lot of rules reviewed, I think, very effectively. And it has been part of my objective to move rules as quickly as we can. As to the factors that can lead that not to happen on some occasions, there are several. One of them is simply this: some rules, as you no doubt know, are extremely complex. This doesn't necessarily correlate with the length of a rule or the number of pages of a rule, but some rules, just the underlying analysis and what the rule is trying to do and our ability to evaluate whether the rule is going to achieve its objectives in a cost-effective way, can be a very difficult process. So the 90-day time period is just simply not possible for some rules.
Because of complexity. Because
of complexity and the difficulty of working through the rules. I would also note that the review process is really a very collaborative process. It's not a case where a rule necessarily comes in and then in one whole big piece gets sent back to the agency and then we wait for it to come back. There's ongoing discussion. There are pieces of the rules that are worked on. Sometimes the agency itself will discover that there are issues with the data or the analysis it has used. So that factor of just working out difficult problems is probably the one that most centrally contributes to longer rulemaking periods. But there can be other ones. Agencies will often have their priorities jumbled by intervening events. They may decide to de-emphasize a rule as a priority for a period of time. So a rule may take a back seat at the agency for 3 or 4 months. Or the agency may say, hey, OIRA, can you wait on that rule that we already sent you and jump this other one in line? And so we have the rule for that period of time. So there are a number of factors that really can figure in. And then other times, as I think I alluded to before, there are rules that really affect multiple agencies. And sometimes it can be very hard to find exactly how the puzzle piece fits with different agencies' statutes and regulations. So that can add complexity and time to the rulemaking process. There can be a trade issue under the WTO that requires significant analysis by counsel. That can take a long period of time. What I can assure you is that the OIRA staff are really highly efficient and work as quickly as they can. We don't want rules on our desks for longer than the normative time. And we work very hard, and I think it shows in the success we've had over the past couple of years, success that started in the months prior to my arrival at OIRA, and that I've been glad to be able to maintain and continue in getting the extended review periods down.
May I ask you to share some of your benchmarks with us? If you may not have them with you today, but will you send us some of your benchmarks that you've been hitting as far as measurable goals in reducing the number of rules under review past the 90-day period?
I'd be happy to follow up with you, sir.
And finally, you talked about complexity as one of the factors. Administrator Shalansky, does OIRA have adequate resources to perform its regulatory reviews? Or in other words, where complexity is slowing you down, would additional resources help?
You know, when it's a question of complexity, it's really just working through hard issues. I don't think that is a case where I would point to the need for additional resources. We've been able to do a pretty good job. We have a really hardworking staff. We've been able to retain really excellent people at OIRA. And I think, look, all of OMB, we're a small office overall, has been, I think, straining against resource constraints to do the jobs that it does. So we at OIRA, I think, are no different from other components within the Office of Management and Budget. But I think we've got the tools we need, and we've been able to do a pretty good job. That's why we've been able to reduce the number of rules under extended reviews, just getting our processes working well and having people work very hard.
Well, thank you for that. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman from Pennsylvania. The chair recognizes the chairman of the Committee on Health Care and Government Relations Subcommittee, Mr. Jordan.
Thank the chairman. Mr. Shalansky, government should be as transparent as possible. Would you agree with that?
Yes, sir.
I mean, that's when we make laws, that's why we have debate, that's why we have a Congress, that's why we have elections. We want it to be as transparent as it possibly can be. And that's what OIRA is all about, right? The agencies have certain rules that they put together. You don't necessarily look at the rule itself so much. You look at make sure they did the process right, the transparency process, and they followed what they're supposed to do when they arrived at the rule they arrived at. Is that right?
We look very closely at the substance.
You look closely at the substance as well, but mostly the process, right?
Nope.
Both of them?
Both of them.
Even better, even better. All right. So the General Accounting Office just issued a report where they talked about the number of agencies who issue rules without public notice and without public comment. The report's entitled, "Agencies Often Publish Final Actions Without Proposed Rules," dated just last month, February 26, 2015. And in that report, they say that the OIRA staff have regularly questioned agencies' use of the good cause exception. So now I just want to make sure I understand this completely. Transparency is the norm. That's what we want. When agencies make rules, they're supposed to have a public notice, public comment period, correct?
Correct.
All right? But there are exceptions to the Administrative Procedure Act where you don't have to necessarily do public notice and public comment. Is that all accurate?
There are some exceptions.
Some exceptions, right. And the GAO is saying we got too many of those. Too many times that's happening. This is their report. But they said when it does, your staff has assured GAO, and I'm quoting directly from their report, OIRA staff have regularly questioned agencies when they use the good cause exception. Is that accurate?
So let me, the answer is yes, it is accurate.
Okay, so I just want to, again, just be clear. When agency says we're not going to do this the most transparent way, we're going to deviate around the normal process. There's an exception for not having public comment, public notice, public comment. But you look at that when they do those exceptions, correct?
So let me tell you what we do.
I want to know if that's a yes or no, though, if you could.
There are times when we have a basis for questioning that. There are times when we do not. There are statutes that authorize the use of what are called interim final rules or direct final rules.
The report says you regularly question agencies' use of good cause exception. So when they deviate from the process, you regularly ask them questions. What I want to know is, in those situations where you don't, is that just a handful of times? Is it 10% of the time? What's the time?
So the times when agencies seek to get around public comment and not to issue a notice of proposed rulemaking, but to go directly to some kind of final rule are very rare.
Okay, very rare. All right, now I want to get to the specific example that's just been in the news just this past month. The Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, has a recent proposal to ban certain type of ammunition. You familiar with this?
No, sir, I'm not.
Okay. And they have said they are not going to follow the normal process, the most transparent process. They're going to deviate from that, and they're not going to have public notice and public comment. And they're citing for good cause. That notice and public procedure therein are impractical, unnecessary, or contrary to public interest. And what I want to know is, has OIRA given the ATF the thumbs up to follow the exception and not do the norm, the most transparent thing, and have public notice, public comment?
So the first thing I would notice is OIRA does not review all federal rules, all executive branch rules. There are thousands of such rules. We review about 500 a year.
That's
So
fine.
it's
I'm
very
asking
possible-
about, but I'm asking about one in particular. I'm asking, did you review this? Did you say to ATF, it's okay if you don't follow the normal public notice, public comment?
So it would not be our place to say that to ATF if that rule was even ever submitted to OIRA. I should make clear, when an agency does submit a rule to us that it seeks to do by a means other than the standard APA process, that is when we have occasion to question that agency.
So you didn't have any, you've had no influence, no say on ATF's decision not to follow public notice and public comment. Do you expect to have any say in their decision not to follow public notice, public comment?
As I say, I'm not familiar with this particular regulation, so I cannot comment
Well, lots
on
of
it.
Americans are familiar with it, Mr.
But
Shalansky.
what I will tell you is that any such determination by an agency is judicially reviewable under the Administrative Procedure Act, and lots of Americans, as you put it, would have recourse to the courts to challenge that determination.
Well, yeah, that's after the fact. Well, what you're supposed to be is on the front end. I know that. Everybody knows after the fact we can take action, but that's costly. That takes more time. The whole idea is that on the front end, we're supposed to get it right. That's what I'm asking you. Did you have, do you plan to check out this rule?
It is not either the role or the scope of OIRA to go to every agency for every rule in the federal government and to second-guess their legal process.
Well, if I could, Mr. Chairman, then I'll stop. But I'm reading from the GAO report, which says your staff regularly question agencies' use of the good cause exception. Here's an agency using the good cause exception, and you're telling me we have not questioned them, and we never plan to question them, and oh, by the way, if you don't like it, Americans, take them to court.
What I told you was I would look at that very closely if the rule were submitted to OIRA. I don't know if this rule was ever submitted to OIRA. I can't question a rule that has not been submitted to my office.
Mr. Shalansky, and that's the problem.
There's no circle.
If the agency says we're not going to submit it to you, then you say, well, we don't have to review it, even though they're not being transparent, not following public notice, public comment.
If a rule is, so as I think I made clear, we don't review all federal rules. Where we question, what the GAO report is referring to, is when we question agencies that have submitted the rule to us for review, or where it is a rule
Well, that's
that we
great.
review.
That's great. I would love not to have, I mean, so they don't even have to give it to the authority who's going to tell them whether, and you said in your opening comments, we're going to look at the procedure they use and the substance. I disagree with both what the ATF did here, both the procedure and the substantive change. This has been a rule that's been in place since 1986, and they suddenly are just going to change it, and there's no review process.
So there is a review process. There's the agents. First of all, the agency is responsible for that policy to do.
They've already told us what they're doing.
If it's an interim final rule goes out for public comment after it's enacted, so there is a chance for public comment.
Mr.
And
Chairman.
there's judicial review.
Yeah,
I don't see
judicial
all
review,
of the
that's helpful.
4,000
Mr. Chairman, I
rules.
apologize. Thank you for your indulgence on the time, but we've been running circles around this, and this is just not transparent the way it's supposed to work for the American people.
I thank the gentleman from Ohio. We go to the gentlewoman from the Virgin Islands, Ms. Plaskett.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and both Mr. Ranking members for this hearing. Good afternoon, sir. I had a question and wanted to get some indication from you about international regulatory cooperation. If you could just speak a little bit about that and its benefits and how that has worked thus far.
Sure, thank you very much for your question. I appreciate that. We have an Executive Order 13609, that the President issued, which gives OIRA a role in international regulatory cooperation. We currently have what I would describe as both formal and informal roles in regulatory cooperation. We have two formal regulatory cooperation councils, one with Mexico and one with Canada. And the objective of that council is to get our agencies working directly with the agencies of our international partners, agency to agency, to try to make sure that there are not unnecessary regulatory impediments to trade, commerce, competitiveness, those kinds of things. So, so we have a very productive set of working relationships with both of those.
And can you cite examples where that has been productive to date?
Sure. With Mexico, for example, there were some very interesting questions about the regulation of nanomaterials in various kinds of products, including agricultural products, and there were very different approaches in both countries. And through the RCC, we've been able to reach, I think, some productive results. We're also working with Canada currently on a number of issues to ensure that regulations that are pending in agencies here don't get crosswise with or create difficulties for entities doing business across our border with Canada.
So I wanted to bring it a little closer to home then, to my own waters in the Virgin Islands, and wanted to know of if the benefit of OIRA being involved in some issues that we have, and that's duplication of agencies in permitting processes. So we have a lot of projects that revolve around our waters, dredging projects, development projects that involve the Army Corps of Engineers, NOAA, EPA, subdivisions within each of those. And that duplication and need for everyone to go through these processes cost us hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, and the impact economically is enormous when we're not able to meet deadlines for dredging projects, which means that cruise ships can't come in, puts us in a competitive disadvantage. Or even now we have a project where the Army Corps of Engineers, we're needing a permit so that we can move from fossil fuel to being one of the first areas in the Caribbean using LPG, liquid petroleum gas in the area, using, propane gas. And the need of duplication between these agencies and coordination is having a horrendous effect on the economy. Does OIRA become involved in that? And if not, why not? And how could you?
So the office, thank you for that question, because you've raised a critical issue, and I think an issue that's a very high priority for President Obama's administration. Permitting reform is a very active process that the Office of Management and Budget is deeply engaged in, and is the OMB, particularly my colleagues on the management side, are running a significant interagency process to streamline and reform permitting. OIRA is available to work on that. It's not really central to the work we do, but we're involved with and certainly encourage that general reform effort. What OIRA does do is when we review regulations that have permitting requirements in them, we look to see whether or not those are unnecessarily burdensome or duplicative. So in the context of reviewing rules, we most certainly do take into account exactly the kind of duplication that you look at. And indeed, part of the retrospective review efforts that we're engaged in with every executive branch agency right now are designed to identify and eliminate exactly the kinds of problems that you look at. But certainly permitting reform is very high on the administration's and OMB's agenda, and I think real progress is being made.
Thank you. When you talked about the retrospective analysis, has there been a notable one that you could give us as an example of retrospective analysis of outdated or inefficient regulations?
Yeah, I mean, yes, we have a number of such rules. Just to give you an example of a very recent one, the Department of Transportation used to require every truck driver after every trip to file an incident report, even if there had been no incident. This was costly in terms of systems, paperwork, driver time, and they went back and determined that there was no safety benefit that came from those reports and repealed the report for savings of about $1.7 billion to the trucking industry. And I think if you stay tuned over the next several months, you'll see numerous additional things.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank you. The chair recognizes the ranking member, Mr. Conley, for a few more questions.
I thank the chair. Actually, we may submit some questions for the record, Mr. Slansky. But one area that bothered me about what you said on how your door's always open and you have to take all comers, right?
Correct.
Are you open on weekends?
I'm working most weekends, but the federal government is not open on weekends.
So the hourly wage earner who might have a concern about a pending regulation or lack thereof, or a view about cost and benefit, he or she has to take time off to avail himself or herself of your door being open. They can't, I mean, lawyers get paid for going through your door. But sort of a working man or working woman who might be affected by actions of your office actually kind of don't have the same access, do they?
You know, we've actually had some very interesting meetings where exactly the kinds of people you've described have come in to see us and to tell us their stories. In terms of the access we provide, it may not be as easy to take advantage of for people who live far away or for people who don't have the means. People can call us. We take telephone meetings. We receive letters. But in terms of our door being freely open to those people, and in fact, some such folks, exactly as you described, have taken advantage of it, I would maintain that we do represent as equal access as it is in our power to provide.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, rather than continue, given the lateness of the hour, if you don't mind, we'd submit some additional questions for the record.
I look forward to those.
I thank you,
and
Chair.
I thank the ranking member for his insightful questions. So let me just close out by following up. The gentleman from Kentucky is here, and he actually serves on the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. We've had a number of hearings in that committee on the waters of the USA, on the proposed rule. And I believe it's your testimony here today that they have not officially submitted that to you. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So you have had no dialogue with them?
I have had no dialogue with the EPA.
Informal or formal?
I have had no dialogue whatsoever with the EPA on waters of the U.S.
Okay. How about deliberations?
No deliberations, no discussion.
So if we were to ask for all your records, we would find 0 records, emails, nothing with the EPA with regards to that rulemaking or proposed rule.
We concluded review on the proposed rule. The EPA took it from there. The next I'll hear about is when they submit the final rule for review.
All right. So let me go back. It gets back to documents. What documents do you actually keep? Because I think we were using the same terminology, but just in different ways.
Okay.
You know, we were talking about informal rulemaking, and then I've heard you say that 3 or 4 times, but yet when I asked the question, you act like you didn't know what it was. So let me be specific, all right? The GAO has come in, and they have found issues with the practice of you reviewing preliminary drafts, that's the preliminary drafts, and doing analysis for agencies before they actually submit it to you, before the time clicks in for the 90 days. Does that sound familiar?
No.
So you've never done that?
Let me explain.
Because I'll get the GAO in here to sit right beside you because they believe that you have.
Look, I can testify to what has happened since I have been administrator of the office, and I can tell you what does happen and what I haven't seen happen. What does happen is there are times that agencies will come to us in advance of submitting their rulemaking package and say, do we have the right components of a regulatory impact analysis? Can you look at the cost-benefit analysis that we're doing and tell us if we're going to need to do more?
But that is before they've actually proposed the rules, so the answer would be exactly opposite of what you just answered. The answer would be yes to that question.
But that is not a review of the rule and a whole package and sort of a preliminary.
Well, let me just say, your students at school, at Georgetown, if they answered your exam the way that you're answering my questions, I would venture to say you would give them an F.
No, I'd give them an A for being precise. I'm trying to explain to you what it is we do and what we don't do.
All right. So it is your testimony here today that there are no documents, no communication that has taken place between the EPA, either informal or formal, in that rulemaking process. That is your testimony.
My testimony, sir, is that since we concluded review on the notice of proposed rulemaking, I have had no communication with the EPA on their final.
So let me make it clear then. Will you send us the documents with any aspect that you've been involved with the EPA on that particular rule? Will you send those documents to the committee for their review, yes or no?
I will not send to the committee documents that were part of the deliberative process where the proposed rule was under review.
All right. Are you aware that by statute that you're required to do that?
No, sir, I am not aware that by statute I'm.
OIRA shall make available to the public all documents exchanged between OIRA and the agency during the review by OIRA under this section.
So that's not a statute, sir. That's the executive order.
Executive order. Are you aware?
That
So
executive
you're only
order-
going to comply with part of the executive order?
That executive order has been interpreted across all administrations, Republican and Democrat, to embody the deliberative process exception of staff-level communications, and we will not, we do not disclose those to the public.
All right.
It is to protect the integrity of the process.
I don't see how it does that.
Well-
Sir. I mean, with all due respect, I don't see how your particular function is to protect the American people. So how, with you being secretive, does that protect the American people?
It protects staff and their ability to do their jobs.
Is that your
Policy-level
primary
communication-
responsibility? When you were put into place, is that your primary
My
responsibility?
primary responsibility is to ensure good analysis. And frankly, we wind up with less good analysis and less good work if staff feel that every communication that they have back and forth with an agency is going to be put under the microscope, pulled out of context. Policy-level official communications, policy-level communications between me and the head of an agency, those are disclosable. But staff-level deliberative process, we do not disclose. And I would just reemphasize, this is across Republican and Democratic administrations that the executive order has been so interpreted.
All right, we'll make one final request, and it's this, is those agencies who have come to you to ask for your input on a proposed rule that they may be in the process of working, either that the GAO talked about, we would like a list of all of those.
I'm not sure I have a list, sir, because we only do this when the agency asks to come brief us, and I don't know that I maintain any such list.
All right, so then with the example that Mr. Jordan gave with the ATF,
As I told Mr.
so
Jordan,
should we have the ATF come back here and testify in how they are taking the good, I guess, good common sense exception? Should we have them come back to testify, since obviously they've bypassed you?
As I thought I made clear to Mr. Jordan, I'm not familiar with the rule that he was referring to. We don't see all 30 of the 3,500 rules that the federal government passes. So I have no comment or knowledge about what the ATF did.
So how do you decide which rules to review?
Well, when the rules are submitted to us, we make a determination
So
which are
every agency,
significant.
they can decide on their own whether to submit them to you?
No, if a rule is not significant, then it is up to the agency to do what they want.
But I will remind you, as you know, the individual and employer mandate, both of those rules were seen as insignificant. Is that your testimony, that you would concur that they're insignificant?
Which rules are you referring to?
The rules that are still outstanding with regards to the employer and individual mandate
Are you talking about the IRS regulations?
with the Affordable Care Act.
Well, if you are referring to the IRS regulations, by
Yes.
longstanding practice, we do not review IRS interpretive regulations.
So why don't you just say you're not reviewing instead of saying that it's insignificant?
I am not saying that it's insignificant. I'm saying
We have it, but
we don't review it.
I think the gentlemen, both ranking members, and each of the committee members who have come today, and with this, this hearing is adjourned.
Thank you.